Today, we're doing something a little different. We're going to put one of the most important figures in all of history, the Apostle Paul, to a modern test. And we're going to ask a simple question. Do they actually line up with what many people consider traditional belief?
So let's just put it right out there. Here's the big question for today. If the Apostle Paul were preaching on a stage right now, would he even pass what's often called the Orthodox test? It's a pretty bold thing to ask, I know, but by looking at his own words, and maybe even more importantly, what he doesn't say, we can build a really compelling case.
Okay, so first things first, we have to define our terms. What in the world is this modern Orthodox test? You know, theology can get super complex, but the source material we're looking at points out that for a lot of people, the standard for sound doctrine really boils down to one very specific belief about what happens after we die. And there it is, the belief in eternal conscious punishment. It's the idea that those who aren't saved will suffer, fully aware, for all of eternity. And according to our sources, this one single doctrine is often used as a kind of litmus test. If you believe it, you're considered sound, you're in. But if you question it, well, you might get labeled as dangerous or even heretical. And it's this test that we're going to apply to Paul's own writings. All right, now we get to the real heart of the matter. And honestly, it's found not in what Paul said, but in what he didn't say. We're about to investigate the writings of the man who wrote almost half the New Testament. And what we find, or rather, what we don't find, is, well, it's pretty shocking.
Now, for his silence to really hit home, you first have to understand just how much he actually taught. Paul's ministry was absolutely massive. We've got 14 of his letters and 12 of his speeches recorded for us. He covered literally everything: sin, grace, salvation, how the church should work. He even said that he had declared the whole counsel of God. So if eternal torment was a core essential doctrine, you'd think it would be all over his work, right?
Well, when you actually chart Paul's writings against the common vocabulary for hell that you find in other parts of the New Testament, something incredible happens. Just look at these blank columns. No Gehenna, no hellfire, no torment, no everlasting punishment, no grashing of teeth. His silence on these key terms is just deafening.
This isn't something we can just brush past. These empty spaces on the chart are a direct challenge to the whole idea that Paul taught what is traditionally believed about hell. This isn't just some tiny oversight. It's a huge piece of evidence in this whole investigation.
Okay, so let's flip it. Let's look at what Paul did say. He uses a word that gets translated as hell exactly one time. The word is Hades. But what did he actually mean when he used it? This is where digging into the original language is absolutely crucial. Just let that sink in for a second. In his entire recorded ministry, all those letters, all those sermons, the word hell shows up just once. I mean, if the traditional doctrine is a central pillar of the faith he was preaching, that's a pretty massive statistical anomaly, don't you think? And here it is, this single instance. He says, "O grave, Hades, where is thy victory?" Now look at the context. He's not trying to scare people about a place of eternal fire. He's celebrating. He's celebrating the resurrection and Christ's final, total victory over death itself. In Paul's one and only use, Hades is something to be conquered and defeated, not a place you endure forever. You see, the Greek word Hades is just the equivalent of the Hebrew word Sheol. And if you break the word down, it literally means the unseen place. From meaning not, and eiden, meaning to perceive. It's about the state of death, the grave, not some fiery torture chamber, but the common destination for everyone who dies, as they await resurrection. So what about that classic fiery image of hell? Well, that comes from a totally different word, Gehenna. And this is the word that Paul, the apostle to the entire non-Jewish world, completely and totally avoided. Seriously, think about that for a moment. Paul, the guy who meticulously laid out doctrine for all the new believers, never once thought it was necessary to use the main word for hellfire. If this was a real eternal destination for the very people he was preaching to, you have to admit his silence here seems, well, pretty inexplicable.
So what even is Gehenna? Well, it wasn't some mythical underworld. It was a real place you could find on a map, the Valley of Hinnom, right outside Jerusalem. It was, for all intents and purposes, the city's garbage dump and incinerator. It was a powerful, local, and very Jewish symbol for complete and utter destruction, not a universal place of spiritual suffering.
And the sources we're looking at argue that this is why we see Jesus using the term in the Gospel of Matthew. He was speaking to a Jewish audience, using a familiar Jewish symbol as part of his message about the coming kingdom for Israel. The argument is that this whole concept was specific to that time and that audience, and it was never actually part of Paul's universal gospel of grace that was meant for all nations.
So if Paul didn't teach about eternal conscious torment using words like Hades or Gehenna, what did he teach about the final punishment for sin? Well, his vocabulary is incredibly consistent, and it points in a totally different direction. The contrast here is just crystal clear. On one side, you have Paul's terms: death, consumed, destroyed, extermination. These words are all about finality, about an end, a complete cessation of being. Then on the other side, you have traditional doctrine: torment, conscious suffering, never-ending pain. All of those words are about endless continuation. These are two fundamentally different ideas. And you can see Paul's own language in action right here. In 2 Thessalonians, he describes the final punishment. He doesn't say everlasting torment or everlasting suffering. He says everlasting destruction. The punishment is a total, final removal from the presence of the Lord, a complete end. And what's really fascinating is that even back in Matthew, where the word Gehenna is used, the language actually lines up more with Paul. Jesus warns people to fear the one who can destroy both soul and body in Gehenna. Again, the word is destroy, the end of the whole person, not the preservation of a soul just for endless torment. So let's bring this all back around and return to that question we started with. We've looked at the evidence: Paul's silence on the key terms for hell, his specific use of other words, and his explicit language of destruction. I think it's time we deliver a verdict. Just remember, Paul himself insisted his message was complete. He said he held nothing back. He believed he was pure from the blood of all men, precisely because he hadn't failed to warn them of anything essential for their salvation. And yet, inside that complete, essential message, the doctrine of eternal conscious torment is nowhere to be found. So, the verdict based on this analysis seems clear. The Apostle Paul would fail the modern Orthodox test. But the argument here is that this isn't a failure on his part at all. His silence isn't some accidental omission. It's a powerful confirmation that his gospel, the unique gospel of grace for all nations, was complete and perfect without that doctrine.
And that leaves us with one last, really powerful question to think about. If the primary apostle to the entire non-Jewish world delivered a complete gospel, a full message of salvation that did not include the threat of eternal, conscious torment, what does that reveal about the nature of God's justice, his character, and his ultimate plan for everyone?